In August 1967, British Rail Western Region embarked on the construction of a 4-kilometre branch line linking the Gulf Oil Company's refinery at Waterston with the existing Swansea-Milford Haven railway line. Design work was carried out in the new works office of the Chief Civil Engineers Department at Paddington, and 10 months later, 1st of July 1968, the line was opened for traffic. The Gulf Oil Refinery closed in 1997, and since then the line has been left to its own devices, and as you can see, the undergrowth has well and truly taken over. Following on from our first programme about the building of the line, Richard Watts, the resident engineer on the project, and cameraman John Bolton went back to South Wales. In September of 2019, they talked to some of the team that worked on the railway and revisited the stories about the line's construction. Richard spoke first to Alan Rees, who was one of the drivers on the site, and asked him what it was like working for Dick Hampton, the earthworks contractor.
It was a good company to work for at the time. I think we was on about 4 and 6 an hour. I think the bonus was about 6 months. We started here driving the lorries down to Hasten Tip, TK Bedford lorries, with all the topsoil from here, from this area here. Yeah. And the TS14s come in to do the long haul work.
Because you had a hell of a job turning in this cutting, didn't you?
Very, very bad. Yeah, it was getting narrower and narrower, see?
Yes, yeah.
You know.
And then you had to drive right up the bank.
Put the tractor right up on our side, get around. And then, of course, you would have watched your ropes then, you didn't snap your ropes. Yeah. Some of the boys had it very easy, like Bobby was on the grader, and that was a piece of cake to drive.
Because we had to cut back Stainton cutting a lot more than we expected because the rock was unstable, we had to get rid of all the surplus excavated material. We negotiated with Percy Davis to bring the material off the line down the side of the ravine, and we filled this area in, which was the side of a ravine with a lot of boggy ground in the bottom, and topsoiled it afterwards, and even left a couple of heaps of excavated stone and material which could be used for making up farm roads and so on. But at least it got rid of it, and we didn't have to go out on public roads, and the scrapers could just come in, dump it, turn it, and back on the line. Percy was very helpful, and he did actually gain some land which compensated for the land which was taken to build the railway line. But of course the constant passage of the tractors and scrapers coming down the cutting, because of water coming into the cutting, it stirred it all up and it ground the fairly softish rock into a slurry, a red ochre coloured slurry, which made it impossible to finish the cutting off properly, and we had to get rid of it somehow. It was about a metre deep in places. So in the end, the contractor in desperation resorted to getting 2 large dozers and driving them down the cutting in echelon to push the slurry down the cutting, hoping they could deal with it more easily in one place. Unfortunately, once it started moving, it came down the cutting and continued on down the hill till it went right to the end of the embankment, which is beyond those trees now, where unfortunately it then spilled off the side of the line where the cutting ended and finished up in a stream down to Castle Pill at Black Bridge. This is the valley down which the stream flowed from Upper Scoverston with all the slurry in it. It caused the whole of that pill or pool to go red, and the tide was in. It was flowing out through the openings, the valves in the causeway in Black Bridge, into the area here, which is also full of water. That central bit, all down there, going right out down to the sea, was bright red, and it flowed out into the haven, which is just round the corner, and turned right with the tide, which was going out of course, and out to the sea, completely changing the colour of the water here at the time for 2 or 3 days, I suppose, before it all went away. Didn't seem to worry anybody at the time, but I don't think we'd got away with it today with all the environmental provisions and so on and the monitoring that goes on. Least said, soonest mended.
The site of the spill at Scoverston was cleaned up and the stream quickly returned to normal.
There was a time when solutions could be found and acted on without holding up the job. Ron Bowen was a driver on the site with experience of several types of vehicles.
Well, first of all, I was driving the tipper lorries, driving the topsoil down. I ended up driving the Bowser, dieseling up all the machines and all like that, like, you know. TS-14s was here, the cranes was here, and they were all over the place, like I had to find them, like. I had to fill them up at dinner time, so I wouldn't stop no working, like, you know.
Yeah. So whilst they were having dinner, you'll be rushing up and down, refuelling. Yeah. And then, of course, you'll be backwards and forwards, up and down the site, whatever the state it was in, to get to the machines.
Only when it had heavy rain, like the machines weren't working, so obviously I wasn't working, like, you know. I was such a good driver, I never got stuck.
Ron Bowen, the intrepid fuel Bowser driver who could always be relied on to keep moving. Another of Dick Hampton's drivers is Brian Thomas, who had operated a variety of earth-moving machines. He explained the type he was working with for the Gulf line.
T8 and box.
You came right at the beginning of the, once the muck shift started?
No, not so much the beginning, quarter of the way through.
Oh, right.
Yeah, because they had lorries moving it.
Taking the topsoil to tip, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Because you know all this crew anyway from...
Oh, yeah. Oh, it was a great crew.
Yeah.
Pity there's only a few of us left.
Well, time marches on. I mean, it was over 50 years ago, wasn't it now?
Yeah.
And of course you had to put up with the cold the same as the rest of them, with the... Yeah.
And then, on a day like today, you're frying.
Yeah. Dick Hampton didn't like cabs, did he?
There was very few cabs then, on anything.
Yeah, I think the only one was the grader, wasn't it? That had a cab.
Yeah.
The TS-14 had a terrible bounce which could cause kidney damage after prolonged exposure, so it was important to take a break on another machine.
Oh, I did drive them, because, you know, when you were driving them, you wanted a spell, you know. So one of the drivers said, oh, let me do a few load on yours, and I said, I never drove one. Same operation as yours, he said, but, you know, take it easy. It was same machine, really, only you could knacker yourself on them.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, they were fast though, weren't they?
Come out after tea time on a big site. Used to be race time. Oh.
What about health and safety?
No, what was that?
I mean, the idea of getting off one machine worth of probably £100,000 in those days, and just simply getting onto another one and saying, well, it's much the same as yours, quite different actually, because one was hydraulics, one was cables, and just saying, well, let's have a swap, and you get on another machine worth £100,000, never having driven one. And that was the way things worked in those days, wasn't it? Yeah. But teach yourself.
Yeah, well.
Yeah, but you know, we had a lot of fun, and there was a crack going on, wasn't there? But
always a crack.
Yes. The leg pulls and the
if you did anything wrong, they were merciless.
You'd hear about it in the pub in the evening.
Yeah. They were all characters in their own way. Big Jim. Yeah. He was a character too.
Yes, he was head and shoulders taller than everybody else, wasn't he?
Oof, he was a big man.
How did you feel when the job was finished?
Sick.
Dennis Giles, Dick Hampton's foreman, here on the left with Tariff's agent Mike Roach and BR engineer Bob Carter, gave the boys some useful cold weather advice, as Alan Rees explains.
It was very, very cold here, very cold. You'd wrap up, you'd have 2 pairs of jeans on and overalls and one thing or the. And he'd say to Dennis about the cold, and he'd say, oh, put some paper up your guts. Now what he meant by that was a cardboard. Put cardboard inside shirt here, and let it break the wind. And it did work. And we all had to do things like that.
They would also fix sacking round the driving seats to keep themselves warm using the heat from the engines. At the start of the job, the work was sometimes held up by local farmers and property owners. One of the strongest objectors was Richard Thomas from Scoviston,
who appeared on site prepared to go to any lengths to stop the site clearance work.
He wasn't keen at all. Actually, he put a 12-bore gun on the fence down the bottom there.
Yeah.
And he said to us, to Pat Malloy, if you go through under my land, he said, I'll shoot you. And he would have.
You can see from this article in the Western Mail at the time that Richard Thomas was serious, but more on this later.
This is Green Lane Farm at Waterston, which at the time we were constructing it was farmed by Leslie Summons. It's now farmed by his son Robbie Summons. And we wanted access to the line through here to bring in materials for building the track, which of course is just further down the lane and onto the level crossing on the double track section. This is very valuable access to the line, especially with the double track portion for the passing loop, which is still there. You can still see the rails, and is an absolute godsend to us. So the cooperation was greatly appreciated. Leslie Summons very kindly agreed to allow us access, but in compensation he said it would be very helpful if his yard could be concreted. Well, we did have a discretionary fund for ad hoc accommodation works. Underneath the bovine product, you might say, is a nice concreted yard, which I think was well worth the price of putting in, because it was absolutely invaluable to get the plant and the sleepers, rails and things like that to the line. So yeah, and it's still there, still in use. Hello. We're back again. Yes, yeah, you're lovely, aren't you? Yeah, hello. Yeah. Oh, well.
Many different trades worked on the line, and Brian Kell was one of the carpenters. He was involved with key structures both over and under the line, often during adverse weather and at times in appalling ground conditions.
I worked on this bridge.
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
And I worked on a few concrete things down
the
underpass down there.
Oh yeah, the
cattle pass.
The
I
cattle
worked
pass
on
for
that.
Barrett's Hill. Yeah.
I worked on that with a carpenter called Teddy White. I worked on the bridge, and I can remember we had to light fires.
Yeah, because it got some cold weather. Didn't
It was cold weather when they were pouring it, and we had to keep 2 drums of wood burning underneath to keep the frost off. We poured it all in one go.
Yeah, it was about 80 cubic metres.
Yeah, day and a night, all right the way through. Yeah.
Actually, it was over 130 cubic metres.
It was an interesting job. I was young. I really enjoyed working on it.
Too.
I never seen the end. I never seen the tracks being laid or anything like that.
Oh, that's a shame. Yeah.
I never seen that. No.
Because where did you live at the time?
Oh, Milford Haven.
Oh right.
Yeah.
So you
I'd have just got married.
Oh right. So you didn't have time to come and have a look then when they were working.
Oh no, I was working somewhere else then.
Did you ever see any of the trains running on here?
No.
No.
Oh, I've seen the trains running, but not at the beginning. No. All I can remember about this place is the mud. But I enjoyed working here.
Well, one of the problems we had when we were surveying the job before we even started were the local Frisian cattle. They're very friendly, very inquisitive. And when the surveyors had their theodolite set up, they'd all come and gather round in the field and block the view. So we're constantly having to chase them away because they wanted to see what was going on. And on one occasion, a very warm day, we had a car that we were using for getting across the fields and so on. They left the car with the windows open and went off to do some measurements at the other end of the field. When they came back, they found that the Frisians had been very interested in the car. Not only had they licked it all over, but some of them had put their heads in the window and eaten some of the plans and some of the car's upholstery. Well, I don't know what that did to the quality of the milk that day, but they were certainly very friendly creatures, but very inquisitive.
These beautiful animals belong to Percy Davis's son and daughter-in-law, John and Elaine Davis, who kindly let us park in their yard at Lower Scoveston. Although the weather turned glorious during the summer months, the winter mud was something that stuck in the minds of the team who worked on the line. Brian Kell again.
I can remember going up and down here in a tractor, mud being up to the trailer.
Yeah.
There wasn't that much delay, but I mean, obviously with all the mud and all, and we only had a tractor and a trailer, you know, but we got through it. I mean, I can't ever remember any delay in the material side of it.
No.
I can remember One thing that was funny, when Teddy White said to me, it was that cold, go and fetch some wood and we'll have a fire. And that was on the bottom, the crossing.
I don't think the carpenters had much trouble finding wood for a fire.
This is where the refinery was. It was closed in '97 and taken away. It's a natural gas terminal now. You can still see the sidings that they built for the refinery. Unfortunately, they were built before we even started work, and they weren't built quite in the right position. The refinery was working to Admiralty grid, and we were working to Ordnance grid. So when we came to lay in our line from the other side of the bridge, we found that there was a 3 degrees difference. But Bechtel, the American contractors, thought this was a terrible, terrible problem. But I said, well, we can quite easily get over this. All we've got to do is to put in a very shallow curve between their track and our track, and we can join them up. So that in fact is what we did. And you can see from underneath the bridge that the track is slightly displayed by about a foot, 300 millimetres, to one side, and everything worked.
The landowner who objected most strongly to the railway also had some knowledge of the geology of the area and was concerned about its effects on groundwater levels, and in particular a water feature on his property.
This is the lake at Scoveston Manor, or Scoveston Hall as it was called then in the 60s, where the owner, Richard Thomas, was very concerned that digging the cutting through his land would lower the water table and drain the lake. Well, it seems to be a bit okay at the moment, but the present owner, Idris Evans, says it does hold up reasonably well, but levels drop a bit during the summer. But apparently, before we came, Richard Thomas said that they used to have a boat, they could go boating on it and so on, and it was one of the assets of the hall, which is of course the building behind you, which has been completely restored, and lovely job they've made of it actually. There was a rather sad sequel to this house. About 15 years after the line was built, Richard Thomas was attacked by an intruder who turned out to be a psychopath, who was jailed many years later for the Marlowe's murders on the Cliff Walk. And he and his sister were shot with a shotgun. She was in bed. Richard Thomas was left dead on the stairs. And the house was torched and burnt down. But as I say, a superb job of restoring the house has been done by Idris Evans, the chap who owns it now.
There's still local speculation about the motive for the murders, and quite recently an article was published in the Pembrokeshire Herald suggesting that the crime was commissioned by other landowners. This was completely untrue. Although Richard Thomas was at times a difficult man to deal with during the surveying and construction of the line, to be murdered was an undeserved end to his life. Sometimes things get forgotten. Behind this hedge the railway is in a cutting, which Mr. F.W. James, the farmer at Castle Pill, was concerned would affect the water supply to his farm. The field on this side of the railway falls away towards a group of trees, in which there was a small brick reservoir, which collected water from a spring which was then piped to Castle Pill.
British Rail agreed to provide them with a 4-inch diameter water main all the way down from Stainton Road to connect to their supply pipe with a valve that could be opened up for the domestic water use for Castle Pill Farm. So the valve could just be turned on and they would still have their water maintained. And later on the farm changed hands and the new owners discovered they had this free water supply, and of course the cost of the water shot up. But this wasn't realised by the BR Estates Department, who were responsible for paying the bills, that these huge bills were being generated by this water meter, which shouldn't really have been happening. And it was about 15 years later they did an audit and wondered what was happening there, and I had to come down and meet somebody from the Swansea district office and show them where the meter was, where the supply was going and what was happening. And so for about 15 years these people had free water. Things never go away. There's always something to be followed up. And it's just as well there were people around that knew what had happened.
Activity on site was very much dependent on the weather. So when work was on stop, many of the team would resort to the Horse and Jockey just down the lane on Stainton Crossroads. They did a nice line in toasted sandwiches, Hancock's beer, a good jukebox, and we were well looked after by a lovely barmaid called Jean, the sister of Brian Thomas, the scraper driver. Alan Rees and Ron Bowen remember the Horse and Jockey.
But this job wasn't a big job for the money because we had so much wet weather. We'd be rained off.
Yeah.
You know, and the bit of money you had then, you used to go to the pub.
When we finished, like, we'd probably go and have a few pints in the pub. Like.
Yeah, I remember the Horse and Jockey. They had a rather dour landlord, Richard Jones, I think his name was, and he was a little bit straight-laced.
Yeah, well, one of the boys was going down there nearly every day, like, at dinner time. And, of course, he was washing his Wellingtons and all off, and he'd been going there for a couple of days. And he came out one day and he said, "You're bad," he said, "you got Wellingtons on." He said, "I just washed them, they're as clean as my shoes." He said, "No, I'm not serving you." So we all went down there one day, about 6 of us, and Big Jim McAllister, he ordered the pints, like 6 pints, and he said, "Oh, you're not going to serve us?" He said, "We got Wellingtons on." We left the pints on the counter and walked out.
The job didn't actually run on beer, but it helps. It helps, didn't it? After hours.
But all in all, there was a good bunch of boys there.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody, there's no fights. No. Usually there's somebody rear up with somebody, but it wasn't to be. Because we had travelling boys here and local lads. Yeah. And we got on very well together, actually.
The job was slow to start in August 1967, owing to contractors' staffing problems, and it was further delayed by exceptional rainfall from October 67 to January 68. To add to this, there were site access restrictions from October to May following the outbreak of foot and mouth disease. But the lost time was made up by a cheerful spirit of cooperation between all the different trades on the job, working long hours. During the winter evenings, outings were organised for friendly darts matches at local pubs, such as the Three Crowns at Hakin and the Grove at St David's. Turriffs, the main contractor, let Trevor, the site fitter, use the site bus for party transport. This typified the general sociability and humour which helped the job along and enabled the completion of the railway in only 10 months on the 1st of July 1968.
Yes, I broke his fall.
This line is a testament to the hard work of a team of dedicated guys who worked through rain and sun to complete the line on time. Now nature has taken back control of the cuttings and the embankments, and it is very unlikely the line will see another train run. Finally, I would like to remember my father, Eric Richardson, who designed the line.
Opens up a lot of memories. But I've never been down here since the day we left here. To see it like this is so sad.